Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Venezuela is on the boil. The country with the world's largest known oil reserves is witnessing violent clashes. Their president says he won the latest election. He has the support of Russia and China. The opposition says he did not win. They have the support of Western powers and some South American neighbors. So there's a geopolitical battle here, and the streets of Venezuela have turned into battlegrounds, with the security forces pitted against the protesters. We'll bring you the full story. In West Asia, threat of another war looms. Will Israel attack Lebanon? Washington and London have told their people to evacuate, while also urging Netanyahu to hold back. Meanwhile, the Israeli army is facing protests. Hundreds of Israelis stormed two military bases. We will tell you why. Are Ukraine and Russia fighting each other in Mali in Africa? Is Kiev joining hands with terror groups to hurt Moscow? We'll explain. Why protests have resumed in Bangladesh, why a sales dip for McDonald's is making economists sit up and take note. An exclusive conversation with India's Olympic star Manu Bhaker and a report on what it takes to make a medalist. Why Ethiopia's currency is falling and what the IMF has to do with it. Why Indonesia's new capital is now a subject of controversy, and how obesity is Kim Jong-un's enemy number one and a national crisis for his country, North Korea. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Torrential rains trigger landslides in the Indian state of Kerala. More than 90 people killed and many fear to be trapped under the debris. The army has been deployed to help with the relief operations. The Kerala government has declared 2 days of mourning. The landslides are the worst disaster to hit the state since 2018. Russia stages major naval drills involving most of its fleet. More than 20,000 personnel are taking part in this exercise. The drills also involve around 300 vessels, including submarines. Russia is said to have the world's third most powerful navy after the US and China. Haiti's prime minister narrowly escapes a gang attack. Gunmen opened fire near a hospital that he was visiting in Port-au-Prince. Gangs control around 80% of the capital. The Prime Minister, who took charge in the month of June, has promised to restore law and order. The Taliban cut ties with Afghan embassies loyal to the former government. This includes embassies in London and Berlin, and countries like France, Italy, Canada and Australia. While no country has formally recognized the Taliban government, some, like Pakistan and China, have their diplomatic missions in Afghanistan. Spain's competition watchdog fines Booking.com, slaps a penalty of more than $400 million. The regulator says Booking.com has abused its dominant market position. It claims that the website's unfair practices have adversely affected hotels in Spain. And India's Olympic hero Manu Bhaker speaks to Firstpost. She is the first Indian to win 2 medals in a single Olympics. It's a Firstpost exclusive.
One medal I had hoped that I will get for the country. But 2 is an immense pride for me. I just kept trying my best in each match and well, it was a great show.
Cómo enfrentar estas situaciones y cómo vencer a los violentos.
Presidente electo es Edmundo González Urrutia.
These are dramatic scenes in Venezuela, statues being toppled, massive street protests and a brutal crackdown. Yet President Nicolas Maduro remains defiant. We told you about this yesterday. Venezuela held its presidential elections over the weekend. Maduro was expected to lose. And most independent agencies say that he did. He lost the election, but not the official poll body. They say that Maduro won with 51% of the vote. Sounds fishy, right? Well, it's on point for Maduro. He's been president of Venezuela for 11 years now. In this time, he's cracked down on the opposition, consolidated power, and pushed more Venezuelans into poverty. So hijacking the poll body is just a normal Sunday's work for him. But this time, there is pushback. Thousands of people have mobilized in major cities. They're accusing Maduro of rigging the election. Take a look. And how is Maduro responding? Well, how do cornered autocrats usually react? They crack down. Riot cops have been deployed across cities. They're firing rubber bullets and tear gas at the protesters. The idea is to stop them from assembling. But that's not all. Maduro is also playing information warfare. You see, the president belongs to a leftist party, so he's tapping into core left-wing fears, like right-wing intervention from neighbors or some imperial American agenda. It's a pitch that usually works in Venezuela, so Maduro has brushed it out.
La misma ultraderecha fascista.
The same countries that today question the Venezuelan electoral process, the same fascist ultra-right that has come together today, all the fascist ultra-right, the Vox group from Spain, Alvaro Uribe Vélez, Iván Duque from Colombia, the Nazi fascist, sociopath Milei, Bolsonaro, the same ultra-right, and the same groups directed by the North American empire that are rehearsing the same operation.
Now, don't get us wrong, the Americans have meddled in Latin America, and that too many times. But these protests in Venezuela appear organic. Under Maduro, Venezuela's economy has shrunk 70%, 70. Around 65% of the country earns less than $100 per month. Inflation is at 50%, so almost a quarter of the population has fled. They've just left the country. Then there is oil. Venezuela has the world's largest reserves of oil. Yet oil output has fallen. It was around 3 million barrels in the year 2000. Now it's less than 1 million barrels per day. American sanctions stop countries from buying Venezuelan oil. Plus, the oil companies are poorly run. They lack proper investments and are mired in corruption. So there is real anger among the people. Which brings us to the other side. Who do these protesters want in charge? Edmundo Gonzalez. He was the opposition's candidate for president. They say that he got 73% of the total votes.
At this moment, I am very excited to tell everyone that we have 73.2% of the voting tallies, and with this result, our president-elect is Edmundo González Urrutia.
Now you have two sides claiming victory. So what's the way out? Well, normally the election body would step in, they would publish the detailed voting tally to settle the debate. So why haven't they? Because the poll body is controlled by the government, Maduro's government. So if Maduro did lose, the data would confirm it, which is why this deadlock is so worrying. Maduro still has control of state institutions. If need be, he can call in the army. And you just heard his statements. He is in no mood to concede the presidency. And what options does the opposition have? Well, one is to continue the street protests. They're not just targeting Maduro, they're targeting his socialist movement. It's called the Bolivarian Revolution. It was started by former President Hugo Chavez. And what does it stand for? Mainly socialism and anti-colonialism. Maduro, too, is a product of that revolution. He served Chavez in multiple government positions. When Chavez died in the year 2013, Nicolas Maduro took over. So protesters are also attacking that revolution. In fact, a statue of Hugo Chavez was toppled today. Many are comparing it to a similar moment in Iraq when Saddam Hussein's statue was toppled. Maduro will crack down. But if the protesters are defiant, who knows? Stranger things have happened in Latin America. Also, Maduro's plan requires loyalty from security forces, but that is not guaranteed. Some cops have started ditching their official duties. They're refusing to repel the protesters. Which brings us to the second strategy, gaining outside support. 7 Latin American countries have questioned Sunday's results. Guess what Maduro did? He cut diplomatic ties with those countries. This list includes Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, Panama, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. Maduro has pulled out envoys from all these countries. Some of them have responded in kind. Panama, for example, has cut diplomatic ties with Venezuela. Plus, there is pressure from the United States. Washington has imposed dozens of sanctions on Venezuela. This election row could invite more of them. So there is mounting international pressure on Maduro to step down. But will that be enough to unseat him? Or will he use it to fuel his claims of outside interference? It's a tricky question. Maduro does have allies like China and Russia. But if the protests at home escalate, even they may abandon ship. It's a big moment for Venezuela and for Nicolas Maduro. It's not every day that long-time rulers are challenged by the people. Let's see if they see this through. Now let's turn our attention to West Asia, where tensions are running high between Israel and Lebanon. There was a fresh round of attacks today. 10 rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel. 10 rockets, 1 Israeli civilian was killed. And this has only added to the threat of another war between Israel and Lebanon. Israeli forces could attack any time, and the West is scrambling to prevent this, to prevent a wider war in West Asia. Governments are not taking any chances. Many countries have asked their citizens to evacuate Lebanon. The UK says the situation could escalate. It has asked all its citizens to leave. The UK's Foreign Office has told them to not depend on London for evacuation. That's what they've said. Don't depend on us for taking you out. Similar advisories have come from 3 more countries, the United States, Germany, and France. So what are they worried about? An attack on Beirut. Netanyahu has issued a warning. He says Israel's response will be harsh.
These are our children, the children of all of us, and the state of Israel will not and cannot ignore this. Our response will come, and it will be harsh.
He's referring to what happened last week. The Hezbollah launched a rocket attack. It struck a football field. 12 Israeli children were killed. The rocket fell here in the Golan Heights. It's a rocky piece of land controlled by Israel. It belonged to Syria, but Israel captured a part of it in a war in 1967. And then in 1981, Israel annexed the whole of Golan Heights. It's been with them since. And this is the area that came under attack. Now, Israel says that Hezbollah have crossed a red line here and they will pay a heavy price for it. And what has Hezbollah said? Well, they've denied responsibility for the attack. But this denial does not hold much water. Israel blames Hezbollah, and so does America, although it doesn't want another war. The US says Netanyahu should exercise restraint.
No nation can be expected to tolerate the kind of severe threats that Israel is facing. At the same time, we believe that there is still time and space for a diplomatic solution here.
Hectic diplomacy is on. American diplomats are working behind the scenes. They're trying to contain the situation. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making phone calls. He spoke with Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president. And Blinken's message to Israel was quite clear. Do not escalate this. Avoid a bigger war. In fact, Italy is saying the same. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is visiting China, and she has expressed concern about the evolving situation in West Asia.
It means that there are different regional players aiming for escalation and always aiming to force Israel to react. I also say this to urge Israel not to fall into this trap.
Don't fall into this trap. That's a message for Netanyahu. What about the people of Israel? What do they want? Well, we can tell you what they do not want. Their prime minister. The war has made Netanyahu deeply unpopular. He paid a visit to Druze, the town in Golan Heights where the rockets fell. And there Netanyahu was greeted by protests.
ראש ממשלה בחתן יתקבל כמו כל בחתן אחר.
רצחת את האב שלך! ועכשיו אתה רוצח את הדרוזים עכשיו! אתה רוצח את הדרוזים!
So while he's pointing fingers at Hezbollah, Israelis blame him for the attacks. It's another matter that none of this will deter him. He wants to retaliate, he wants to launch a major strike on Lebanon, and he's trying to rally global support for it. The Israeli government has released a video, and I must say this could be disturbing. Disturbing to watch, so we advise viewer discretion. So Israel won't back down. Where would it strike? So far, the fighting has been limited to the border areas, the southern part of Lebanon. That's where the Israelis have been attacking. They've targeted Hezbollah bases there. But what if Israel aims for Beirut, the capital of Lebanon? Well, then Dahieh could be a potential target. This is a stronghold of Hezbollah in the heart of Lebanon's capital. It would be a very risky attack, though, and ill-advised, because Hezbollah will not take it lying low. An attack on Beirut will have major consequences.
I think they are smarter than hitting Dahieh. Hitting Dahieh, it means to Hezbollah that they'll hit Haifa, they hit Tel Aviv. We cannot control that as a government. And I think this is dangerous. It means big escalation.
So Israeli forces will have to prepare for a retaliation. Do they have the bandwidth for this, for a multi-front war? The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is already dealing with a shrinking fighting force. Many reservists are not reporting for duty. Israel also needs more firepower. Reports say they're facing a shortage of military equipment, also munitions. So as Israel prepares to attack Lebanon, it must also look within. Its people do not want a war, its army is stretched thin, and its allies are upset. Can and will Netanyahu defy all of this? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Israel has a lot on its plate. The war in Gaza, the tensions on the Lebanon border. What's worse, there is chaos within. And we're talking about the military here. On Monday, hundreds of people stormed 2 military bases in Israel. Hundreds of Israelis stormed 2 military bases. They were there to prevent the arrest of Israeli soldiers. And why were the soldiers being arrested? They were accused of torturing and assaulting prisoners, so they were being taken for questioning, Israeli soldiers. But some people were against this, so they stormed the military bases and tried to free the soldiers. And all of this went on for 12 hours. It was dramatic and worrying. And this episode shows the deepening divide in the Israeli society. Our next report brings you the details.
This is Seyteman in the Negev desert, around 30 kilometers from the Gaza border. It's a military base for the Israeli Defense Forces, but since the Gaza war, it also doubles as a detention center. This is where Israel holds detained Palestinians. A few weeks ago, a prisoner at this base was rushed to the hospital. He was bleeding from his private parts. He was unable to walk. And he wasn't the first. At least 30 detainees have died at the facility since October 7th. There have been allegations of abuse, sexual assault, and even rape. So the Israeli army launched an investigation. The probe looked into the action of 9 reservists. They served in the Force 100 unit. On Monday, Israel's military police unit arrived at the base to detain those reservists. But things got out of hand. The reservists confronted them. They refused to come in for questioning. Some even used pepper spray against the unit. After a while, news of this got out on social media. Posts talked about a military raid at Seyteman. So politicians jumped in. Far-right ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich condemned the arrests. They asked their supporters to show up at the base. Soon, hundreds of far-right protesters arrived at Seit-Eman. Lawmakers joined them. Together, they broke into the base.
The soldiers in this country are a consensus. If they touch our soldiers, we'll build a shield wall. The people will rise up against the government, be it left or right or whatever. Nobody can touch our soldiers.
The protests then spread to another base, the Beit Lid military base in central Israel. This is where the reservists were taken for questioning. So the protesters broke into that as well, trying to release them.
So it's first time in Israel that the police army, the military police, arrest soldiers from the reserve because they have a lot of claim against them. And it's actually, in the end of the day, it's the army against the army.
All of this continued for nearly 12 hours. So the Israeli army had to act. The IDF chief of staff arrived at the scene. He was met with slogans and more protests. Soon, combat units were called in, and finally the protesters left almost around midnight. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the incident, calling for immediate calm. But only 2 Israeli ministers have slammed the incident. The others have either stayed silent or supported the reservists. This is one of the biggest incidents of political violence in Israel since the war. It also reflects on the tensions in the IDF. Their chain of command is under threat, and that endangers Israel's security, especially at a time when the army is fighting in Gaza and weighing its options against Hezbollah. But this is not the first time Seit-Eman has been under the scanner. Ever since the war broke out in October, there have been multiple reports of abuse. Israel has brushed it under the rug. But earlier this month, there was an international outcry. The detention center was shut down, but it's still raising questions. The world backed Israel when Hamas attacked on October 7th. But its actions in Gaza and incidents at bases like Seit-Eman are fast eroding that support.
Now let's turn to another war, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The war was fought in a new theatre last week, far from both Russian and Ukrainian territory. The latest Russia-Ukraine clash took place in Africa, in the West African nation of Mali. Now, this was not direct warfare. It was an indirect battle between Ukrainian intelligence and Russian mercenaries. Mercenaries from the infamous Wagner group. Some of you may remember Wagner. It was involved in some of the heaviest fighting in Ukraine until the group revolted in June 2023. Their former leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, marched towards Moscow. His coup failed. He died 2 months later in a mysterious plane crash. And Wagner was put under the Russian Defense Forces. But Prigozhin had built up a large presence in Africa by then. So this division, the African arm, was renamed. It was called the Africa Corps, basically a rebranded Wagner group in Africa. It's now operational in Mali, where it works with Mali's ruling military junta. Now, apparently, they work together to combat terrorists and separatists. But last week, these Russians suffered a setback, thanks to Ukraine, in Mali. Let me explain how. Starting with the battle. It took place near Tinzaouaten. It's a small village near Mali's border with Algeria, and it's a militant stronghold. There are multiple insurgent groups in this region. You have the separatist Tuareg people who've been fighting for independence since 2012. Then you have terror groups like the JNIM, which is affiliated to the Al-Qaeda. There are also other outfits allied with the Islamic State and other terrorists. Basically, this entire region is quite dangerous. Now, Mali's junta and the Russian mercenaries have been fighting against all these groups, terrorists and separatists. And last week, they engaged with the Tuareg rebels. There were skirmishes early last week, but the real fighting began on Thursday, and initially it seemed to be going well for Mali and the Russians. They seem to have been pushing the rebels back until nature intervened. A sandstorm reportedly broke out, forcing the junta and the Russians back. This gave the rebels time to regroup and to get back up. Now, here's what Wagner says. The rebels increased their number to 1,000 people. The Malians and the Russians were heavily outnumbered and they were surrounded. And that is when the rebel onslaught began. Now, we don't know the final death toll. There are conflicting reports. Some reports say that 20 Russians were killed. Others say that 82 Russians were killed and 15 were captured. Now, if the second report is true, it would mark one of the worst defeats for the Wagner group, at least outside Ukraine. And ironically, Kiev may be the reason for this defeat, because Ukraine's military intelligence agency says it played a part in this battle. The agency spokesperson made an announcement on Monday. He said that the rebels were given necessary information and more. What is more? Maybe drones. Ukraine-style unmanned drones. They were used in the attack against Wagner. So this information and more apparently helped them rout the Russians. It sounds like an outlandish claim that Ukraine would be working with separatist rebels in Mali. But then this photo has been doing the rounds. It was allegedly taken after the battle, and it shows the rebels holding up two flags, their own and Ukraine's. Now, if Ukraine did have a role to play here, it won't be a first, because Kiev has done this before. They've worked against Russia in overseas battles in Syria and the Sudan. But this is the first known Ukraine-Russia clash in Mali. And it also poses a unique dilemma. Ukraine claims that it is fighting with the Tuareg separatists, and it's working to eliminate Russian war criminals. At least one Wagner commander was killed. The fate of another is still in doubt. A Russian war blogger tied to the Wagner group is also reportedly dead. So Ukraine will be treating this as a victory, both for them and the Tuareg rebels, who, by the way, did not work alone. I mentioned that this area is home to multiple terror groups. Apparently, all of them supported the Tuaregs to defeat the Malian and the Russian force. And this should pose an ethical dilemma, at least for Ukraine's backers in the West. Because if all of these reports are true, Kiev is working with terrorists. Russia says that Ukraine even has boots on the ground in Mali, and it is training the separatists and terrorists there. Moscow might be exaggerating, but will the West at least investigate these claims? Or will it turn a blind eye to all the Ukrainian activity, no matter how destabilizing, as long as it keeps hurting Russia? The calm is over. Bangladesh is protesting again, and these are not violent protests like before. They're more scattered. But Sheikh Hasina is not taking any chances. She has deployed riot police across Dhaka. The idea is to contain the situation, to make sure that it does not spread. But I know what you're wondering. Didn't the court agree to the students' demand? Well, they did. The Supreme Court of Bangladesh has cancelled most quotas. Around 93% of jobs are now quota-free. And this decision was made on the 21st of July, after which the protests were called off. But the story did not end, because the fallout of the protest was not addressed. You see, more than 200 people had died in the violence. Thousands were left injured, and almost 10,000 protesters had been arrested, 10,000. So student groups issued an ultimatum, They had two demands from the government. One, release student leaders and protesters from jail. And two, an apology from Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister. That's what they wanted. Now, neither has happened yet. So on Monday, the protests resumed. Around 20 people were arrested from the outskirts of Dhaka. There are also reports of sporadic violence. The question is, will it spiral out of control? The United Nations is certainly worried about that.
The Secretary General remains deeply concerned about the situation in Bangladesh. He notes the reports of the resumption of student protests today and reiterates his call for calm and restraint. He is also alarmed by emerging reports about the excessive use of force by security forces and credible evidence of human rights violation.
How is Sheikh Hasina responding to this? She doesn't seem like the apology kind. As for the arrests, there is no timeline. The government will decide whether to prosecute or release them. But she is considering one move: to ban the Jamaat-e-Islami. Now, the Jamaat-e-Islami is an Islamist group in Bangladesh. They were part of the Kota protests. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has blamed them for orchestrating the violence, and she could be right, because the Jamaat has a violent past in Bangladesh. They are known for hijacking protests. In 2018, the Jamaat was deregistered as a political party, and now they could be banned altogether. A minister has already confirmed this move, so it's only a matter of time. And it's a good move. No more political mobilization, no more radical press conferences, and no more hijacking. It is the right way to deal with extremists. But what about the students? What is the government's policy towards them? We have to say it's far from ideal. Just consider what happened this month. The students organized protests against job quotas. How did Sheikh Hasina respond? She compared these students to Razakars. That's people who collaborated with Pakistan in 1971. Basically anti-nationals. Razakar is considered a huge insult in Bangladesh. And that comment from the Prime Minister made things worse. Then there was a crackdown, a very brutal crackdown. Was it really necessary to issue shoot and sight orders? Or to use live ammunition on crowds? In hindsight, it wasn't. This whole issue could have been handled better, and that's the lesson here. Large-scale violence is never the answer. Maybe the demands are unfair, maybe it's beyond a government's mandate, but still you cannot lash out, because all said and done, these are still your people. These are still the citizens of your country. And don't get us wrong, sometimes you do have to use force to maintain order, but killing 200 protesters is extreme. So our message to leaders is pretty simple. Your words and actions matter. It can be the difference between protest and anarchy. So be mindful of that. Sheikh Hasina still has a chance to redeem herself. The country needs closure after days of violence and deaths, and she can provide that. Now is the time to rise above political differences, to heal the divisions and to call for unity. Let's see if the Prime Minister of Bangladesh seizes the opportunity. Our next story is about McDonald's. One of the biggest fast food chains in the world. The brand is synonymous with affordability and junk food. But for now, we'll focus on the affordability part. McDonald's burgers are known for this. So much so that they're used to study price differences, currency exchange rates, and even inflation. But now the story is shifting. McDonald's is struggling. The brand is reporting a drop in sales worldwide. They're down by 1%. McDonald's shares have tanked by 15%. Why? Because customers find their burgers too expensive now, and many prefer to eat at home instead. Our next report tells you why.
Who doesn't like McDonald's? Whether it's breakfast, lunch or dinner, there are few who would turn it down. The idea of having a McDonald's meal. The world's most famous burger joint has something for everyone. For decades, the brand has appealed to all age groups, from kids to world leaders, even former presidents.
But this thing you've pulled off, it's amazing. A big and tasty for just $1?
But today, McDonald's universal appeal is being tested. The company has reported a minor drop in sales. They fell by 1% between April and June. Going by the numbers, this may not even appear significant. But McDonald's is showing some significant signs of stress. The drop in sales is the first since 2020, when a global pandemic forced millions of people to stay at home and businesses to remain shut. The post-pandemic recovery has been challenging for the burger maker. After an initial bout of optimism, there's been a slowdown of sorts. In February, McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczynski made an admission. He said that McDonald's stores are receiving fewer orders. Customers earning below $45,000 a year have stopped ordering. These are low-income customers. In America, that's around 40 million households, or 100 million Americans. A large chunk of these were McDonald's customers, thanks to its affordability. They are now choosing to cook at home. For them, even a McDonald's burger now seems expensive. The prices of some of the items on McDonald's menu have skyrocketed. For instance, at an outlet in the US, one cheeseburger is priced at around $8. Earlier, the same burger was on the company's $1 menu. These soaring prices are not sitting well for some of McDonald's most loyal customers. They have taken to social media to call out the company. McDonald's is struggling overseas as well. In China, McDonald's stores are getting fewer customers. And in West Asia, the boycott calls over Israel's war in Gaza ended up hurting the business. But the biggest factor remains the cost. McDonald's is trying to address this. It's trying to bring the prices down. But amid a cost of living crisis, it is proving to be difficult. McDonald's is not the only one struggling. More food chains like Starbucks, KFC and Pizza Hut have all reported a decline in sales. Fast food wasn't supposed to be a luxury, but increasingly, it appears to be so.
It was a good day for India at the Olympics. We bagged another medal, this time in the 10-meter air pistol mixed event. India was up against South Korea in the bronze medal match. The Indian duo won 16-10, and guess who was part of this team? Manu Bhaker. This was her second medal in Paris. She won bronze in the women's 10-meter event, and now she has won bronze in the mixed event too. It's a feat that no Indian has achieved since independence. 2 medals in the same games. And her journey is quite inspiring. Bhaker had a heartbreak at the Tokyo Olympics when her pistol malfunctioned, but she's come back stronger. She spoke exclusively to Firstpost just a short while back, and she spoke about the lows of Tokyo and the highs of Paris. Listen in.
Tokyo taught me much needed lessons. And from there, I would say that this journey was much more success because of the experience that I got in Tokyo. The things did not go as per my way, definitely. But now I can look at my medals and be like, okay, what is done is done. Let's just focus on the next. Because again, the next Olympics will be after 4 years. So rather than celebrating now for this medal, the 2 medals that I've got, I would rather try my best in the next event, and then I can celebrate all together.
Her partner was Sarabjot Singh. Again, an inspirational story. Sarabjot tasted disappointment over the weekend. He narrowly missed the finals of the men's 10-meter event, but what a comeback he's made. From a near miss to a bronze medal. This is why sports is so inspirational. But tonight we're going behind the scenes. We're not looking at the podium. We're looking at the journey to reach there. Basically, how is a medalist made? We say it boils down to 3 C's: cost, culture and commitment. Let's look at Manu Bhaker. The Sports Minister of India has come out with some numbers. He says the government spent 2 crore rupees on her. That's around $230,000. And where was this money spent? On training, on travel and on hiring coaches. In fact, I have a list for you. The government has spent 41 crore rupees on the men's hockey team, 5.7 crore rupees on javelin ace Neeraj Chopra, more than 3 crores on PV Sindhu, 1.5 crore rupees on Rohan Bopanna and 1.3 crores on table tennis player Manika Batra. And these are just some examples. Put together, the government of India has spent 400 crore rupees. Of course, the cost will differ because some events require more investment. Some athletes may require more training, so the cost varies from case to case. But money alone is not enough. You need to create a culture of winning, whether it's including sports in schools or holding your nerve in the finals or creating a safe space for athletes. That's the difference between a competitor and a medalist. So how is the government doing that? With the Khelo India Games. Think of it as an annual Olympics for young Indians. The idea is to find grassroots talent from across the country. You have the Khelo India Youth Games. You also have the Khelo India University Games. They create a pipeline of talent. Plus, it helps in conditioning. Such large-scale events teach athletes how to handle pressure, how to perform when huge crowds are watching. And it's a priority for the government. This union budget has set aside 900 crore rupees for Khelo India. That's 26% of the total sports budget. Which brings us to the final C, and that is commitment. It's pretty much self-explanatory. Governments can only help to some extent. In the end, it's all up to the athletes. Our Olympians are giving their 100% in Paris, so clearly commitment is not an issue. But how do we check the remaining 2 boxes? How do we increase India's medal tally? Well, there are 2 routes available. One is the US model. Their Olympic committee does not get money from the government. It's all private donations. Same with athlete selection. Most of them belong to the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletics Association. It's a non-profit that manages college sports in America. Now, the US has sent around 600 athletes to Paris, and out of 600, 400 are current or former NCAA athletes. So the American model is simple. Let the colleges and private agencies figure it out. And then we have the second route, the Chinese model. Beijing is the biggest public spender on sports. Their expenditure is almost $3.2 billion. In India, it's only $406 million. Look at the gap. But China's model also comes with problems. It puts children under immense pressure at a young age. Ideally, India needs a mix of the two. We need a lot of spending by the government, but we also need private participation. Of course, that could also trigger a whole new debate. Who deserves credit for the success? In fact, that debate has already started. Indian companies have released congratulatory ads for Manu Bhaker. LIC has done it. So has Bajaj Foods and FII and Fiji. Now, Manu Bhaker's managers are planning legal action. They say only brands sponsoring Bhaker can use her picture. Others cannot. Now, on the face of it, nothing wrong here. You did not support her Olympic journey, so why are you piggybacking on her success? But there's opposition too. There's the other side of the argument. The government says it spent 2 crore rupees on Bhaker's training. That's 2 crores of taxpayers' money. So shouldn't everyone be allowed to celebrate her too? I know it's a complicated debate, but it's also an important one because we cannot depend on the government alone to improve our medal tally. We need an all-round campaign. One that brings together colleges, companies, and families. Our next story is from Ethiopia. It's a country in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa region. Ethiopia is Africa's second most populous nation, home to almost 110 million people, and all those people have made a gamble. Or rather, their government has made a gamble for them. I say this because the Ethiopian government has just secured a loan from the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. Ethiopia is getting a bailout to help stabilize its economy. They will receive $3.4 billion from the IMF. $3.4 billion over the course of the next 4 years. The first tranche, worth about $1 billion, should be disbursed almost immediately. And that's not all. This loan is the first of many. Ethiopia is also expecting money from other lenders like the World Bank. Those loans should come up to $7.3 billion. So overall, Ethiopia is hoping to unlock more than $10 billion in external loans. That is the Ethiopian government's latest gamble. Now, normally, a loan should not be considered a big risk. After all, loan amounts and interest rates are all meticulously calculated. You also have predefined loan tenures. So this should be a well thought out move. A move made keeping a country's financial health in mind. But that only happens under normal circumstances, when a country is not under tremendous pressure or crumbling economically, which is not the case in Ethiopia. Inflation in this country is over 20%. There's a cost of living crisis caused by the Wuhan virus pandemic, the multiple wars taking place across the world, and a devastating drought in parts of Ethiopia. They're also recovering from a brutal civil war in the Tigray region. Plus, there are other ongoing conflicts all over the nation. So Ethiopia is far from normal circumstances, which is why it turned to the IMF, the so-called international lender of last resort. It's an ominous nickname, and for good reason, because if the IMF gives you a loan, it always extracts its pound of flesh, sometimes to deadly effect. Ask Ethiopia, they're already feeling the pinch. Yesterday, the country's central bank released a statement. It announced a major revision of Ethiopia's exchange rate system. Up until yesterday, they had a fixed exchange rate. Their currency, the Ethiopian birr, would trade at a fixed rate. That's the system they had. On Friday, this was a bit more than 57 birr for $1. But yesterday, this fixed rate was scrapped with immediate effect. Do you know what happened then? Their currency crashed. It lost about 30% of its value. At the end of the day, it was trading at about 75 birr to the dollar. The IMF says this is a good thing. It says all currencies should have market-driven exchange rates, and in the long run, this will help Ethiopia. Now, this may be true because Ethiopia was facing a chronic foreign exchange shortage, because the fixed rate did not accurately reflect the value of their currency. So no one really wanted to give Ethiopia dollars at that price. A market-driven exchange rate will be more accurate, and it should help bring in more dollars. But there's a problem here. What happens if the currency, the birr, keeps plummeting? What happens if the markets decide that the currency is worthless? The birr could go into free fall. And this could further crush the Ethiopian economy because the country is facing a drought. It needs to import food and other essentials. What happens when those crucial items keep becoming more expensive because your currency keeps losing its value? And this is not some theoretical problem. Just look at Nigeria. Nigeria did the exact same thing last year. It ended its fixed exchange rate and let the markets take over, again at the insistence of the IMF. Look at the result. Last June, 400 Nigerian naira were worth $1. A few days ago, it was about 1,500 naira to the dollar. Nigeria's currency has crumbled. It shows no signs of recovery or stabilization, and this has led to a surge in inflation, affecting the poorest sections of society. The most vulnerable Ethiopians now face the same risk, thanks to the IMF's loan conditions. Now, you know that protests are breaking out across Africa. They began in Kenya last month. The people were protesting against Kenya's annual budget. The budget called for increasing taxes. Do you know why? So that the Kenyan government could appease the IMF. This is what sparked the protests in Kenya. Protests are about to begin in Nigeria as well on the 1st of August. And part of the reason is the cost of living crisis there. Again, caused in part by the IMF. So it is a pattern. The IMF comes in, it promises to give loans, but demands a steep price, eventually leading to hardship and chaos for the poorest sections of society. The IMF is based in Washington, D.C. It's a Western financial institution, and it is breaking the backs of the poor. Obviously, that reflects poorly on the West. The US and its allies want to influence Africa. They don't want to lose the continent to their rivals, Russia and China. But at the same time, a Western lender is impoverishing African nations. It is no wonder that some of these countries prefer loans from China, no matter how steep the cost. Because it seems the IMF loans are somehow always worse. And that is why I said that Ethiopia has just taken a gamble, because these days taking an IMF loan is like gambling with your life. Our next story comes from Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, at least for now. Why do we say this? Because Jakarta is running out of space and it is sinking. So the outgoing president, Joko Widodo, has proposed an ambitious plan. He wants to change the capital of his country to Nusantara. It's a forested region. More than 1,000 kilometers away from Jakarta, Indonesia is turning it into a planned city at the cost of $33 billion. This plan was announced in 2019. Since then, the progress has been painfully slow. The city is only about 15% ready, but the president remains undeterred. He started working from Nusantara instead of Jakarta in a brand new presidential palace that is still under construction. How unusual is the president's bid? What does it take to build a new capital, and has it been done before? Here's a report.
Imagine that you're the president of a country. Where would you like to work from? Possibly a fancy office in the capital city. But what about an under-construction building? How about 1,000 kilometers away from the country's capital? As absurd as it sounds, that's exactly what Joko Widodo is doing. He is the outgoing president of Indonesia. He's spending his remaining time in office in a new city, in a brand new presidential palace which is not fully complete yet.
Today I have started receiving officials for meetings here in the president's office, but I cannot take you to see the meeting because there are still a lot of workers around, so we don't want to disturb them.
That's quite the working environment. And what's behind this self-inflicted torture? Right now, Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia. Since the country's independence, it has expanded from less than 1 million people to about 30 million people. It's running out of space. There are traffic problems and toxic levels of pollution. On top of this, Jakarta is sinking. There are too many residents and they are draining the groundwater. Plus, thanks to climate change, seawater levels are rising. So in 2019, President Widodo announced an audacious plan. He wanted to change the capital of Indonesia. And his pick was this, Nusantara. The city is located in Kalimantan on the island of Borneo. Nusantara is about 1,200 kilometers from Jakarta. Kalimantan is 4 times bigger than Java. Shifting capitals is an ambitious plan and an expensive one. It will cost Indonesia $33 billion. Widodo doesn't have that kind of money. The state is shouldering 20% of the cost, and for the rest, he's relying on private investments. He has signed a presidential regulation to grant investors land rights in Nusantara. He is also working out of the would-be capital in the hopes that investors support the project. But the inflow of money has been slow, and so has the progress. Construction is moving at a snail's pace. Deadlines have been missed repeatedly. Top officials looking over the project have resigned unexpectedly. But the president is undeterred.
This is a massive project. With a timeline of 15 to 20 years, this isn't a 1 to 2 year project. A lot of people think we're chasing deadlines. No, we're doing this according to what progress is there, and according to plans and the stages we've set.
On August 17th, Nusantara will hold its first ever Indonesia Independence Day. It's expected to be the official transfer of the capital city. And on October 20th, President-elect Prabowo Subianto will be sworn into office. At least, that's the plan. Nusantara will only be 15% complete by Independence Day. The whole city is expected to be complete by 2045. What Indonesia is doing is unusual but not unheard of. In 2005, Naypyidaw replaced Yangon as the capital of Myanmar. In 1960, Brasilia replaced Rio de Janeiro as capital of Brazil. So it has been done before. But it remains to be seen when the new capital will be relocated officially. For now, the sinking Jakarta remains the capital of Indonesia.
For our last story tonight, let's talk about obesity. Science calls it a chronic disease. If you're obese, it means you have excess body fat. Some call it a modern-day condition. Others say it has always existed. Globally, 1.1 billion people are obese. That's 14% of the global population. By 2035, that number could rise to 51%. So it's a big problem for the world. But right now, it's an even bigger problem for North Korea. Its leader, Kim Jong-un, is battling obesity. Forget nuclear superpowers. Looks like Kim's biggest struggle is with his weight. Now, North Korea is one of the most secretive countries in the world. It's called the Hermit Kingdom. So you may be wondering, where is this information coming from? Well, it's from an intelligence report released by South Korea's top spy agency. They keep track of every activity in the north, and this is what they chanced upon. Kim's health struggles. Now, some background here. Kim Jong-un was born in 1984, so he's 40 years old. He's around 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighs around 140 kilos, 140. That puts him in the very severely obese category. In 2021, Kim Jong-un lost some weight, around 20 kilos. He looked visibly slimmer. His face appeared thinner, and this broke hearts across North Korea. People were worried about their leader. They thought he was ill, that he was suffering from some disease. Some even cried at the sight of him. That's not the reaction you would want after a makeover, but Kim did not seem to mind. After all, North Korea is a very different society. It's cut off from the rest of the world. It struggles with a food crisis. Half of its citizens are impoverished. There is rampant malnutrition. So in a country like that, being overweight is a sign of wealth. It's like a status symbol, apparently. And as the country's leader, Kim Jong-un must be a reflection of that. So his weight loss journey did not go down too well with his people. What's worse, it did not even last. Kim gained all his weight back. On top of that, he smokes every day. He's a heavy drinker. He's often under stress. And all of that is now leading to health problems. He apparently has high blood pressure. He's suffering from diabetes. And if this continues, there could be heart problems too. Now, this is a national crisis for Pyongyang. It's also hereditary. Meet Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea and the grandfather of the current leader, Kim Jong-un. In 1994, the senior Kim collapsed after a heart attack. All efforts to revive him failed. So his son took the reins of power. That's Kim Jong-il, the current leader's father. In 2011, he too died of a suspected heart attack. So the Kim family has a history of heart diseases, and it has not ended well for them. Officials fear that the latest Kim in power could meet the same fate. So they're scrambling to find new drugs, to procure medicines from abroad. But what if none of it works? What would it mean for the kingdom? That's what North Korea is, where power is transferred from father to son. Kim Jong-un is the third leader from the Kim dynasty. He's still relatively young. He's 40. He was expected to rule for the foreseeable future, but his health is a wild card. So they're zeroing in on a successor, someone who can take over if something were to happen to Kim. And who would that be, the successor? Reports point to this child, Ju-ae. She's Kim Jong-un's daughter. She's around 10 years old. She's been accompanying him to events. North Korean media calls her Kim's most beloved child. And he is said to have other children, but not much is known about them. So right now, Ju-ae is the favorite. She's being groomed to take over, but she's still very young. Imagine a child ruling the kingdom that has been firing missiles and challenging world powers. Sounds absurd, but that's North Korea for you. Nothing is too outlandish for them. As for Kim Jong-un, it shows that even the most formidable leaders are not immune to the trials of the flesh. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Paris, the floating Olympic cauldron draws thousands of spectators every day. Nearly 200,000 people celebrate the Torch Festival in China. And a vacuum cleaning robot dog hits Italian beaches to collect trash. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1930, Uruguay hosted and won the first ever Football World Cup. They defeated Argentina in the finals. The World Cup started as an invitational tournament with just 13 teams. Today, it is one of the biggest sporting events in the world. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Chez vous là, de l'autre côté. Ouais.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
Kamala, you're fired.
I say, bring it on.
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on First Post America.